Chapter 12. Ollie crouched low beside Tuck, his bow ready, eyes roaming. The world here was alive in a way that made the outer bands feel dull. Lizards skittered across the brown and white bark of giant birch trees. Squirrels leapt from branches. Birds sung and fluttered about. The forest floor was a latticework of writhing vines and shifting shrubs, a maze of living snares. "Let's get in and out, eh?" Ollie said, more to himself than to Tuck, who was wagging his tail in anticipation. With a shaky breath, Ollie firmed up his voice and prepared to use the language. "Nasty." "Hunt." Tuck's body twitched, and his snout rose up to sniff the air. A moment later, he was off, and Ollie was trailing behind, an arrow at the ready. Tuck picked his routes through the tree-dense forest, avoiding roots, odd-looking fallen branches, and anything else which made the hound's nose flare or ears twitch. They gave a wide berth to the vines sprawling down from trees, intertwined like webs spun by some massive twisted spider. Ollie checked Tuck's paths incessantly, sometimes calling him back to take a route further around a large tree or unnerving brush. There was so much motion. Something was always moving. Hares dashed back to their burrows. Squirrels skittered up trees with acorn treasures. Snakes slithered beneath the leaves. Toads croaked. Birds sang. And even the trees stretched themselves out towards Ollie. Their movements were slow, but Ollie knew to look for them, noticing roots stretching higher, branches dipping lower, and the green moss on the tree's bark shifting. It could have been paranoia, a decade of nightmares haunting him, but he gave the trees plenty of distance anyways. "Come on, boy," Ollie said, annoyed at the way his voice quivered as he nudged Tuck away from another trail of rabbit droppings. "We need something bigger, much bigger." They'd been traveling mostly in zigzags, Ollie shooing Tuck away from scent after scent the moment he realized it was small game. But it was the game Tuck had grown used to, what he was trained to find. Ollie cursed as realization hit him. Tuck didn't know how to look for anything else, or at least he didn't know he was supposed to be parsing out the scent of something larger from all the barrage of smells he was getting. Ollie needed a word, a command in the language to give Tuck something to grab onto. But he couldn't remember. "Find a deer, boy," Ollie said, still running to keep up with Tuck's frantic pace. The dog was following another scent now, and from the droppings, Ollie was seeing it may be a fox, but he wasn't here for a fox. Ollie started going through the language, looking at everything around him and working to name it, praying that just naming things would bring the word to his mind. Tree root, Korain, the lizard, Yasht, the robin, Skirmua. Ollie's mind raced, picking up speed as the words came quicker and quicker. A pair of spiders, one black and one pale white, their webs intertwined. Siar babuke and Umker bubuke. The fox Tuck was tracking would be Lishkal, and a deer would be Loviti Jumia. It was like striking a flint to dried kindling. Tuck didn't hesitate or falter. The words sunk in with force, and he lurched off eastward. Ollie trailed behind, hustling to keep up. Less than 5 minutes later, Tuck slowed, and Ollie saw the tracks. Large impressions in deep soil. A print like two ovals beside one another, each with a fine point at the end. As though they were as long as Ollie's hand, meaning the buck would be what? Larger than what Lars had nabbed for sure. Tuck must have caught the scent before, but had ignored it. Maybe there were deer in the outer bands after all, and Tuck hadn't known to look for them. The thought soured Ollie's stomach, but it didn't matter now. If Tuck had slowed, that meant they were close, very close. It meant maybe they'd leave with enough meat and pelts to sell and buy blankets and clothes and food, and Ollie shook his head. He needed to focus. They had entered a stretch of forest whose trees were old and massive, but the underbrush was more scarce. Water trickled in a creek in the distance. Sunlight poured through the leaf-laden canopy. Birds swooped through the light's rays. Ollie and Tuck kept themselves low, creeping along in the shadow of an oak, Ollie peering ahead. And then there it was, as simple as that. The antler was visible first, 12 bone-white points bobbing gently up and down as the buck grazed, its snout working at something on the ground. Most of the deer was hidden behind a large willow whose branches dipped and swayed near the ground. "Good boy," Ollie breathed, hardly even a whisper. He placed a knee to dirt, giving himself a solid foundation, then raised his bow and drew back the string. He took a deep breath, gently pushing the air from his body, a command rolling out with it. Zabik. Kill. Tuck launched forward, sprinting for the rear of the oak behind the buck. As he rounded the tree, he let out a bark, and predictably, the deer sprang forward, revealing himself for a split second. He was gorgeous, beautiful white spots along his flank, easily a third larger than anything Ollie had ever seen before. Ollie's muscles moved of their own accord. His arms twitched, aiming slightly up and to the right as he let the string go. In a heartbeat, the buck jumped, the arrow flew, and then the deer had disappeared behind another tree. "We got him," Ollie said, breaking into a grin. Oh, he'd seen the arrow fly true, finding its home somewhere near the animal's lungs. And he could feel it. The part of him that went with each arrow. He could already see the fresh blankets he'd buy, could smell the carrots and potatoes, could feel the coins in his hand. Tuck would track it easily enough, and then Ollie had gone to stand, but his knee was still planted firmly to the ground, held fast. Panicked, he looked down and saw a vine as thick as 3 fingers wrapped tight around his leg and working up toward his hip. Horror choked his breath from his lungs. Horror choked the breath from his lungs as effectively as if the vine squeezed around his throat. The vine pulsed, purple liquid moving beneath the green flesh. Sharp thorns budded along the vine's length, piercing his pants and calves, pulling blood free so it could drink. It moved quickly now that it was on him, but Ollie just stared, frozen. The vine was creeping upward, thorns pushing into Ollie's thigh and drawing thin lines of blood which spilled out into the pool, onto Ollie's pants before being sucked into the vine, slurped up like the last bit of stew. Dark memories filled the world around Ollie and that vine. There was fog, the barking of dogs, hissing of snakes. Oh, he could hear his father yelling for him to fight, but Ollie only watched, listened. Those screams rang through the forest now like they had then, his father's voice. But not only his father's. Gems, Calorinas, Umans, Progs, and others, broken and bloody, he watched as beasts and vines had consumed them all, dragging every drop of their blood to the soil. "It'll take me. I'm dead too. Ollie saw the knife, sheathed at his hip, about to be engulfed by the vine. There were older memories, too, and they whispered in his mind, and, more importantly, his muscles. He could remember feeling that same blade cut in 2 vines like this before. His father looking over him, instructing him, his large hand covering Ollie's smaller one, sawing it back and forth. Ollie snapped the blade from its sheath and brought it down point first to where the vine slithered up from the forest floor, pinning the vine there and cutting off its advance. Then Ollie twisted the blade, quickly moving it to a slicing motion. Purple liquid, thicker than blood, but with the same copper smell, poured from the incision. Moments later, the vine was cut clean through. The part of the vine still on the ground writhed, but what was wrapped around Ollie's leg was limp and lifeless. Dropping his bow, Ollie used both his hands to peel back the dead vines from around his calf and thigh. His eyes drifting to the points of blood on the tips of thorns. His blood. The sound of rustling leaves behind him sent shivers up his spine, but he didn't look. He snapped up his bow and rolled forward, away from the sound, relief making him heady. Sweat ran into his eyes, and he wiped it away as he twisted to see if the vines followed, imagining them slithering after him like a brood of vipers. 2 of them hung from a tree above where he'd been, tips now stretched out lazily toward him. Idiot! Ollie snapped through gritted teeth. He knew better. He wasn't in the outer bands anymore. He wouldn't get the opportunity to stop, to think. Here you keep moving or you die. Ollie ran to where he'd seen the buck last, then took off in the direction it had run, eyes peeled for blood and tracks. He found both in abundance, especially Tuck's familiar line of prints in the muddy soil. He followed the trail as fast as he could, one eye always roaming for danger. It wasn't long before he heard the sound of Tuck's barking. A moment later, Ollie burst into a small clearing where the buck lay beside a small creek. Tuck's front paws on its side, claiming it. Ollie's arrow was stuck halfway into the deer's chest, blood pooling around it. Vines stretched downward from all the trees encircling the clearing, drawn to the dead and to the dying. Ollie bounded over, yanking his arrow from the beast and dumping it back into his quiver, blood and all. The buck twitched, one eye locked on Ollie, shaking and quivering in pain. Ollie's knife was still covered in the purple lifeblood of the vines when he ran it through the buck, ending its suffering. He didn't bother to clean the blade before sheathing it, the sounds of shifting leaves rushing him along. He wanted out now. Ollie heaved the buck over his shoulder, the animal's blood warming his back as it soaked his cloak and tunic. He would have to scrub for hours to get the smell out, though the stain, that would be permanent. The weight of his shoulders was heavy, but not quite as much as a full-grown man. He'd be hard-pressed to run, but he would move quick enough. He had no choice. While he stepped back, boots squishing, dirt made muddy by the passing stream. There was a moment where Ollie wondered if he could carry the deer all the way home. He was tired already from the running, the nerves, but then one thought cut through all the others. Move or die. It was that simple. He needed food, he needed the pelt, and he needed to keep moving. Either he pushed through, or he died. Take us home, boy, Ollie said, stumbling away from the descending vines. It only took him 2 paces to realize Tuck hadn't responded. Ollie turned, the imbalanced weight of the deer almost toppling him. Tuck was a few paces away, edging away from Ollie, eyes east and tail still. His paws moved slowly but deliberately, his whole body aimed eastward, toward something somewhere in the distance. The call. Tuck, Ollie called, voice firm. Tuck didn't even look his way, nor did his ears twitch in recognition. Ollie's stomach sank and his throat went dry. Nightmares of this moment, the moment where Tuck gave in to the call, had haunted him night after night, but he wasn't ready for it now, not ever. Tuck, Ollie said again. Palmedits. Tuck faltered. His ears twitched and his head cocked to the side, though he still didn't look back. Ollie firmed his voice, adding steel to the edge of each word. Palmedits. Prist. Come. He threw the word out like a chain, wanting to capture Tuck and pull him back from whatever darkness the wood was calling him towards. It was at the last word that Tuck shook his head and turned. He trotted over to Ollie, tongue lolling, as if nothing had happened at all. Don't act all innocent, Ollie said. Nearly killed me with fright. Now take us home. Diomok. Tuck yipped, then dashed westward, Ollie trailing behind. Vines retracted back up into the trees, their prey now gone. Ollie was moving too slow, and he knew it. The buck's weight made it impossible for anything more than a fervent walk, which would have been bad even if he hadn't been leaving a trail of blood behind him. But with the scent of blood running down his back and to the forest floor, he might as well have been screaming for the wood to come devour him whole. The critters scattered at his passing, getting as far away as they could, sensing what was coming. This was the wood, and even the roaches knew what fresh blood would bring. But the vines writhed in pleasure, descending eagerly upon the pools of blood. Just get over the wall. If he could, then they'd be safe enough. As far as he knew, none of the beasts in the deep ever left. If he and Tuck could cross back into the outer bands, they'd be fine. The wood would be eager there, too, but it wasn't the same, and he could handle that. Ollie thought about putting the buck down and doing something to stop the flow of blood, but Stopping would be asking the vines to snare him. Keep moving. And then Ollie heard the howling. His mind screamed in terror, and he moved faster, picking up his pace to a painful and awkward jog, the best that he could manage. The blood poured out faster, and Ollie nearly collapsed as the weight of the jostling deer increased with his pace. Any playfulness in Tuck was gone now, the dog moving faster through the winding maze of trees. Another howl, closer this time. It was a twisted, gurgling sound which drew goosebumps along Ollie's arm. He had to force himself not to look to see if a wolf pack was bearing down on him. Wolf howls traveled far, and a wolf half a mile away could sound as if it were merely at arm's length. He might have plenty of time, though he doubted it. The path Tuck was carving for him seemed complicated now, dragged out. Wide twists and turns that felt more reckless than just barging straight westward. Every extra step was more time, and all that to avoid the possibility of a trap or unsafe terrain. But behind him was the certainty of a fight. Ollie charged forward, choosing the fastest way over the roots, through piles of leaves, and even over squirming vines. He ignored the path that Tuck carved for him, and he moved faster as another howl ripped into his eardrum. He ran with all he had, praying whatever gods actually existed would find a scrap of mercy and let him make it to the wall. He prayed his lungs would hold out and that the wolves were further away than they sounded. He prayed that he would live. And then the toe of Ollie's boot hooked into an outstretched tree root, and he fell. The ground rushed up to meet him, the buck's weight driving his head down hard, and the world shattered into 1,000 splinters of light.